Welcome back to the Painted Pages channel presenting Chapter 9 of Odyssey. Enjoy the creation of breathtaking acrylic paintings, bringing the pages of our story to life. Chapter 9, Lost Civilizations.
We'll walk to our next destination. It is across the street.
Azor said, leading me to take the stone steps back to the entrance of the historic building. We stepped outside into the busy street again, where the lunatic taxi driver had dropped us off. The frenzied big city life and loud rush-hour traffic were in stark contrast to the quiet, serene atmosphere of the cistern underneath the city. Good. After my last experience, I don't think I have the guts to take a taxi again, I said. I had lost my sense of time. It seemed close to dusk in Istanbul. What time is it? I asked.
It is 10:30 a.m. in Atlanta, and Istanbul is 7 hours later, so it's 5:30 p.m. here.
We walked to the other side of a tramway and crossed the street. I was genuinely impressed by the beauty around me. History was pouring out of the city. Within the few feet we walked, I could tell with my untrained eyes that the city proudly held centuries of footprints of many cultures and civilizations. Even the local people on the street reflected the entangled cultures and history. They were beautiful. Some looked like they had popped out of fashion magazines, and some reminded me of my father's family, more conservative, and there were others in business suits, but they were all beautifully blended. Then there were the most obvious ones, the tourists walking through the historic streets of Istanbul in wonder. 3 young girls, probably teenagers, were approaching us. They all looked at Azur admiringly. All 3 of them, almost simultaneously, studied me quickly. Then their stares went back to Azur again. They giggled. They must have been convinced I wasn't in his league to be his girlfriend. One said something in Turkish, and they giggled even louder. I could swear Azur's mouth slightly curved, but the rest of his body language suggested he was oblivious to them. He reached up and held my hand. What did she say? My voice was glum from the way those teenagers had regarded me.
She proposed to me,
he said in a low voice, looking a little embarrassed. You know what? I've been meaning to ask you, I began.
to marry you.
No! I raised my voice as if I were offended, though in truth I wouldn't mind. You've been preaching to me about how the form is not important. It's the soul's development that matters, and how your race is advanced. If this is the case, why are you so beautiful? The physical form shouldn't matter, right? But from looking at you and your brothers, I have a theory that it must run in your race, not just in your family. If everything is our manifestation, and you've said it's even much easier to manifest in your dimension, then you must have manifested this as well. I waved my hand up and down to indicate his whole body. He was amused by my diagnosis about his race and their beauty.
You have a point. My ancestors went through a similar ascension process thousands of years ago, like what you're going through right now. There are differences, but at the base level, it's very similar. The 4th dimension works as a transition period between the 3rd and the 5th. It is not as condensed as the 5th, but manifestation can still come into being at a fast pace in the 4th. As I said before, this is why it is important to get rid of all your fears in the 3rd dimension, otherwise you'll be doomed in the 4th. When my ancestors discovered that anything was possible during the transition, what did they do? They fixed their physical flaws. It mattered to them because they were in transition and still recovering from the dense energy of the 3rd dimension, where beauty mattered. They wanted to be taller, have better facial features, a better body, and very few resisted or didn't care. But whatever they did, it stayed in our DNA.
What a curse, I said.
Believe it or not, beauty is not an issue anymore on my planet. We focus on the energy, not the physical appearance. This is only something that's stuck with us, like the birthmark on your neck.
He touched the small, light brown mark on my neck with his thumb. It was hardly visible.
It is there, but it has no functionality. We don't really care. However, I have to admit, it is an asset here since people on Earth are more receptive to beauty. It makes things much easier for me.
You get your way by dazzling them, I said in disapproval.
Humans have an easier time trusting me. Take you, for example. If I had approached you with the look of a Quasimodo, would you have taken the time to listen to me? My miracles would only have scared you. I would have eventually earned your trust, but it would have taken me forever.
He was right. I nodded in approval. I can be pretty shallow myself.
Don't be so hard on yourself. This is an instinct of any human. It comes with the territory of the third dimension.
We approached a gate that seemed to be the entrance to a mosque. The domes and massive, slender minarets dominating the skyline were visible from the outside. We entered through iron doors, arched by a gray stone roof that continued around the gate and became a fence to the outer courtyard. I looked back to see where we were, as I wasn't paying attention to my environment, and saw another massive building with red walls and minarets at the other end of the square. It was as impressive as the one we were about to visit. It must be another mosque, I thought to myself.
This is Sultan Ahmet Mosque, also known as the Blue Mosque due to the colors of its interior tiles.
Azur said when we were standing in the middle of the courtyard.
Did you notice the impressive red building at the other side of the square outside?
I nodded.
That one is the Hagia Sophia Museum. It is the reason why they built this one in the first place. Hagia Sophia was originally built in the 4th century as a Catholic church, and it was the most impressive one at the time. After the Ottomans took over the city in the 15th century, they converted it into a mosque. Still, they were not satisfied. So the young sultan of the time, who decided he wanted a mosque more impressive than the Hagia Sophia, ordered the construction of this one.
Can we visit Hagia Sophia instead? I wasn't a big fan of mosques. They reminded me of my father and his family. My father and grandfather had paid frequent visits to a neighborhood mosque when I was visiting Turkey. There had been many of them around the neighborhood, and I was able to see the minarets from every direction of the apartment building. When it was prayer time, which was 5 times a day, the unsynchronized calls to prayer from the different mosques were unbearable. After we came back from Turkey, my father became even more distant toward us and started going to the mosque on a regular basis. And one day, he never came back.
It is already closed for the day, and so is the Blue Mosque, but it is still open for worship. I may pull some strings to get us inside before the next prayer starts. Plus, I don't want to use my dazzling good looks unless necessary.
He winked at me.
Besides, we're not here for a typical touristy tour. I've brought you here to experience the energy. Honestly, the energy of Hagia Sophia isn't that impressive, believe me.
Why not?
The negative energy of politics and centuries of conflicts between the religions reflected on the place. It was supposed to be the most important monument and the most sacred place in the city. But eventually, politics became involved, and it has lost its sacredness. When the city fell into the hands of the Muslims, there was much despair. And when it was converted to a mosque, it was not welcomed by the Christians. It's breathtaking inside. I'll take you there someday, but for the sake of today's purpose, let's skip it for now.
We headed to the huge stone stairs leading to the inner courtyard of the mosque. A man approached us immediately. He must have been the guard, ready to tell us it was closed to tourists. But Azur had his way of handling things, and as soon as they started to chat, the guard let us in and walked us to the entrance door.
Take your shoes off,
Azur said right before we entered the place. The guard gave us plastic bags to put our shoes in.
We've got only 30 minutes before the next prayer starts, and you need to cover your head to get in.
Before I could question his comment, he pulled something from his back pocket and handed it to me. It was a silk-like scarf with blue and yellow geometrical patterns. I gave him a look, but wore it anyway. Why should I want to feel an energy that requires me to cover my hair? It can't stand to see the sight of me, I snapped.
You're not wearing the scarf for the energy inside. You do it for the guard, for the others inside the mosque, and for hundreds of years of belief systems. The spirits inside couldn't care less, even if you showed up naked, but it is the humans who created the rules and most think it is necessary. You should always respect everybody else's opinion, even when you disagree.
He sighed and continued.
Listen, I know how much you hate mosques, but this one is different.
He added with a reassuring look on his face.
If only you know how to listen.
I nodded and silently followed him through the door. The inside of the mosque looked smaller compared to the outside's huge appearance, but it was impressive regardless. Massive columns supported the dome-like high-rise ceiling, which arched beautifully to create the look of many entwined arches. I could see where the name had come from by looking at the blue tiles, in unique Ottoman designs, layering the inner surface of the walls. There was a second level on the sides, supported by smaller, slender columns. The ground was covered by what seemed to be many identical rugs laid next to each other, matching the colors of the tiles. Hundreds of colorful stained glass windows enhanced the glorious look of the interior even more. There were a few other people, oblivious to us, cleaning the mosque floor for the next prayer session. I had never been in a mosque before, and despite all my biased opinions, a similar feeling that I had sensed at the cistern washed over me. It was stronger here, though. I stood still instinctively for a few minutes in its sacred quietness.
Close your eyes and listen.
Azur whispered to me. I did as he said, and an overwhelming feeling of love poured over me that brought tears to my eyes. I could sense that a source in this place welcomed me. I think they're greeting me, I said. But there was more to it. I kept my eyes closed for a few more minutes, and the feeling inside me grew stronger. The sense of being welcomed turned into a sense of acceptance. Whatever the energy was in this mosque, it was accepting me unconditionally. They're accepting me for who I've been and for who I am with unconditional love, I said. I felt content in their presence. I felt whole. When I opened my eyes, I could tell from the grin on his face that Azur was pleased with my progress. What are they exactly? I wasn't sure what I was communicating with. Is it some kind of ghost?
No, they're not ghosts.
He was amused by my intellectual level on the subject.
I've told you that ghosts are depressive beings, operating at very low vibrations. You wouldn't feel any love if there were ghosts around. You would feel only discomfort. These beings are slightly different from those in the cistern or the passages underneath Istanbul. The ones here have probably lived on Earth many times before as human beings. They eventually ascended, but they chose to serve on Earth because of their love for humanity. They also operate from higher dimensions, and they prefer not to be in physical form anymore. They're dedicated to increasing the vibrations of humans by offering them unconditional love.
Why this mosque? I asked. Why not somewhere else?
Well, one obvious reason is that people come here to connect with God. With their hearts open, they're receptive to suggestions, and they end up receiving unconditional love while praying, which lifts their spirit.
Are you suggesting that Muslims have been right all along? Islam is the only way to go? I was offended. The religion represented everything I was against. It was the reason why my father left my mom and me. It was the reason why his family never approved of my mom. And it was the reason for centuries of bloodshed. Azur shook his head as if I was getting it all wrong.
No, it has nothing to do with this place being a mosque, a church, or a temple. You can find hundreds of similar places around the world that hold very similar energy. It could be in somebody's home or garden. I've been in many mosques all around the world, and humans should simply stay out of some of them. Some are filled with love, but some are filled with only hatred and negativity.
I understood his point. He had brought me here to abolish my stereotypes. You want me to make peace with Islam? I said.
I want you to make peace with all religions, but I also want to show you that you can find love in the least expected places. You should stop judging religions, places, and even people based on what they remind you of or what they represent, and see them for what they really are.
What are they? I knew what he would say, but I wanted to hear it from him.
They're part of God, on the journey of remembering who they really are, or reminding you of who you really are.
Who got it right then? Muslims, Jews, Christians, Buddhists, or atheists? I asked, curious to find out his opinion.
None of them and all of them. You need to understand that there isn't any right or wrong in this universe. Everything is about experience and growth. One has to experience everything in order to reach wholeness with God. You've been a member of all of these belief systems in many lifetimes. Everybody has. Religions have been brought to earth to soften people, but we also know that in the hands of the wrong people, any belief can be completely distorted. However, this is part of the learning curve. The evil has to be known so that the good can be appreciated, and this is an unavoidable fact of duality in the third dimension. Once one holds unconditional love in their heart, this is the only time they can eliminate duality and understand what it is to be whole. These beings here know what unconditional love is, and they've just offered you a glimpse of it so you could know it too. There is no judgment, no religion, and no right or wrong in their books. They accept you for who you are because, in their eyes, you're a part of God. You are God.
My eyes wandered again to the walls and the giant columns. It was easy to see why these spirits chose to be here by looking at the magnificence of the prayer hall. The tiles, columns, windows, and the openness of the space were incredibly uplifting. I had finally grasped what Azur and the spirits were telling me. Nobody, no belief system, was superior to any other, but it was human ego that made them different. Our walls not only separated us from our true identity, but also separated us from each other. I could have stayed a little longer in the sacredness of the place, but we had to leave as the next prayer was about to begin. We left the mosque in a hurry. I was startled when the call to prayer started a few minutes after we left the outer courtyard. It was pretty loud, and as I was expecting, calls from other mosques all across the city started simultaneously, but not entirely synchronized. "How do the people of this city bear to listen to this every day, 5 times a day?" I complained, remembering my childhood.
It has become part of their life. Most don't even hear it anymore.
He shrugged his shoulders.
But I love it.
I sighed. I knew he would find a way to explain to me how I was wrong to pass judgment on it.
You know, you don't have to visit these sacred places to find peace and acceptance. Your heart already holds the essence of your true self, your God self. You can experience the same unconditional love if you visit your heart every now and then. These prayers are great reminders to pull yourself away from the hectic moments of life and be still in the moment to feel your heart, your essence, so you can feel closer to the truth.
Easier said than done, I murmured to myself. Azur gave me a look that said I was impossible. "Don't judge me," I said. He shook his head in disapproval but smiled. We arrived at what seemed to be a historic train station. It turned out that it was a one-stop funicular climb of a steep uphill. Within a few minutes, we were walking in the middle of a busy shopping street. I could easily recognize a few of the brand-name shops.
Are you hungry? It is nearly lunchtime in Atlanta and we had an early start today.
I had only had half of a pancake with Anne in the morning, and I was starving. Thankfully, we didn't have to walk any farther, as Azur pointed to an entrance of a restaurant.
After you.
We went upstairs to a rooftop terrace and were greeted by a spectacular view of Istanbul. The place was crowded, and a few people were waiting to be seated, but not very surprisingly, Azur spoke to the host, and we were seated outside with the best view. "You know this is not fair," I was upset. "You keep dazzling your way around. There were others ahead of us waiting in line for this seat." I narrowed my eye as I looked at him, not approving his behavior. "Your karma is going to get you someday."
What?
He looked at me surprised.
I made a reservation here. They should have done the same.
"Oh," I said to my surprise. I couldn't make any other comment. The weather was quite warm for October, but there were blankets on each chair just in case. The view was breathtaking. Azur pointed out the places we had seen, the Hagia Sophia and the Blue Mosque, which were clearly visible from where we were sitting, but it was the harbor, the Golden Horn, that was the most impressive of all, entangled in the greenery and the historic sights of Istanbul. The city was breathtaking in every way.
Have you changed your perceptions of the city yet?
Azur asked teasingly. The reality was nothing I had expected. I was falling in love with the city. It was beautiful and welcoming. I nodded my head sheepishly, embarrassed to admit I'd been wrong all along.
I had to bring you here. I want you to have a truce with your past. You need to forgive everything in your past so it won't drag you down anymore. But it will be a gradual process. You link this city to your relationship with your father and his family. There was no memory in your mind that was pleasant, so I had to erase that. This is only a beginning.
He looked at me again, tenderly. I didn't want to talk about my father or my life anymore. I wasn't ready to let go of many hurts in my life, not yet. "Tell me more about you," I said. The waiter arrived to take our orders. She smiled warmly at us and spoke fluent English immediately. She must have overheard us talking. She placed olive oil and a basket of bread on the table. I didn't have time to look at the menu, so I asked Azur to order for me. "Surprise me," I said. He continued the conversation after the waiter left.
What do you want to know?
"Let's start with how long you've been on this mission on Earth." He heaved a deep sigh.
Around 250 years.
I had to sit back to digest the number. After what I had gone through with him the last few days, it shouldn't have hit me that hard. I didn't think there was anything else I couldn't handle today, but I was wrong. "How old are you then?"
I'm 434 years old.
He said. His eyes were on me, measuring my reaction again. "Wow," escaped from my mouth. "What's the average life expectancy of your race? Do you even get old?"
Around 1500, but it is up to us. We don't get sick or accumulate any karma, which is actually nothing but a soul's own way of reprimanding itself. So we don't have to endure unexpected things in life, like humans do, or try to battle them. Although things on Earth are always unpredictable for those of us who work here, we don't take it personally, and we try not to attach so we don't age much. We decide when we want to leave this life.
Nice. I nodded my head, though I couldn't even imagine being able to live thousands of years. The possibilities of the things I could do during such a long life were overwhelming.
Technically, we're the same age. I've told you that before, so does it really matter?
I guess it shouldn't, I said. We both were 6 billion years old and created from the same breath, whatever that meant. I let out a deep sigh to calm myself down. How about our soul's age then? Are we old?
It is a little above average compared to the majority of humans on Earth. The souls on Earth are mostly older than 2 billion years,
he said while dipping a piece of bread in the olive oil.
Souls younger than that cannot function properly on the lower dimensions, so they're usually kept in higher realms like children. They can't leave home until they can be self-sufficient.
He shrugged and took a sip of his water. How can I know if a soul is older or younger? Is there any way I can determine how old a soul is? I was curious if there were specific characteristics that a soul would display to show its age. I followed his lead and dipped a piece of bread in the olive oil. Then I put the whole thing in my mouth and almost moaned. It tasted divine. I could hardly return my attention to him when he answered my question.
Young ones, between 2 and 3 billion years old, usually operate out of fear. They always feel the need to protect themselves. They don't like change, and they try to hold on to old belief systems or traditions. They're fearfully religious and conservative. The souls between 4 and 5 billion years old like power. They're more curious, more ambitious, and most politicians or military people, for example, usually belong to this category. Towards 6 billion, the soul starts being more involved with the truth and with spirituality. They don't care about material things much anymore. There are many evolved souls on this planet at this time of the Earth cycle, more evolved than you and I. They mostly work as teachers or as light workers in human bodies to help raise the frequencies on Earth.
What does that make me? I asked, confused. If I'm 6 billion years old, how come I have a lot of fears? Until you showed up, I knew nothing about spirituality, gods, or one God, the Creator, and I had never been interested in the subject. I tried to make sense of what he was telling me.
You had many lives in which you were fearless, and you had great interest in the truth. You have fears now, but your fears are only on the surface. You don't really fear death or not having anyone you could rely on. You know you can support yourself. Do you remember the day you saved Anne from those 2 men?
He knew I had never forgotten that day.
A 3 billion-year-old soul wouldn't have been able to do that, and having power over other souls is not important to you. Besides, against all the negativity in your life, you still never stopped believing in God. Deep inside, you couldn't deny it. And above everything else, if you had been a younger soul, no matter what I'd said or done, you would have merely run away from me. You wouldn't be here, nodding at my unbelievable explanations about God and creation.
I was pleased by his comment. Maybe there was hope for me, after all, that I could ascend to his level. You brought me to the mosque to help remove my judgment about Islam, but you're also telling me that the Greek, Indian, and any other myths about the gods have truth in them. And Christianity got it right too. You sound like a great admirer of the Buddhist monks. Why do we have those religions? Are they even God-sent? Then I remembered what God really was. It was the collective consciousness of everything around us. It was us, and it would not directly interfere with our acts or decisions or judge us in any way, as it was experiencing every unimaginable possibility through us. There wasn't any right or wrong in its book, but only unconditional love. So I corrected my question. Are the religions sent by higher beings? He nodded, confirming that religions are, in fact, sent by higher beings.
Earth is the only place in the universe, a unique place, where it matters that there is such a phenomenon called religion. As complicated, or sometimes as brutal as it is, beings from all around the universe come here to experience this life. I will keep reminding you repeatedly that it was your choice to come here, just like other human beings. You may not have been interested in religions in this lifetime, but you had other lifetimes during which you were quite the fanatic.
I snorted at his comment. I wish I remembered them. Hopefully I wasn't one of those control freaks who tried to manipulate the masses.
No, you were never the controlling type. It has a lot to do with your soul age.
Another question surfaced as I dipped my bread in the olive oil again. Why do we have so many different religions that don't agree with each other? It's creating nothing but more negativity on the face of the earth.
They do agree with each other if humans would only see the resemblance. They're brought to prolong the Earth cycle so that more humans can ascend. Remember, this is a school. Religions were sent here so there would be more graduates at the end.
I don't think religions help. My brows knitted. Obviously, it didn't help me. If I had many lives where I was dedicated, why am I still here, not ascended?
A soul at the verge of ascension is no longer in need of being part of any religion, Lara. The purpose of the religions was to raise consciousness and prolong the Earth cycle, but it was never to provide a direct path to ascension. They were meant to start a spark of compassion in the minds and hearts of humans, but they also limit the boundaries of the minds. It is part of duality, and it is unavoidable. You had to move into your heart completely once you felt the spark in you, but you didn't. And it was okay.
His face clouded with an emotion I couldn't recognize at first.
And it's still okay if you can't, because in the end, it's all about the experience. If anything, you'll only grow wiser. I want to help you achieve higher vibrations sooner for selfish reasons.
I realized that was the shame that troubled him. He didn't want to spend another 10,000 years without me, and he saw it as his weakness. Regardless of my incompetence, he respected my life choices and thought he was interfering. Hey, don't be so hard on yourself. Remember we had a contract? Probably it was I who insisted that you should help me. I must have known how hopeless I would become. I winked at him, but his eyes said otherwise. I needed to change the subject. So help me understand the whole picture. How do creation, religion, and incarnation correlate? He gave me an appreciative look for my wanting to go back to our original subject and turned his head to look at the beautiful view of Istanbul. I couldn't decide which of the scenes was more impressive, the city of Istanbul or Azur's profile, though they complemented each other. From the look on his face, he was sorting out his thoughts again so he could explain them to me in the simplest form. He looked back at me intently after a few seconds.
I'm trying to put this in a way that you can understand.
I could tell. I smiled at him. I did need simple explanations to comprehend what he was about to say.
Everything in the universe is a reflection of the Creator, from a single-celled organism to the entire cosmos. Therefore, nothing disappears, not only because we're simply energy, but it's also against the nature of God. We only change form. A single cell is created and eventually dies, but in truth, it only becomes a different type of cell, even more evolved, and a new one replaces the old one. Even today's scientists have confirmed that the universe is ever expanding, although there will be a time when it will start contracting again. And it will disappear eventually, but that won't be the end of it. Humans are born, grow, get older, and die. But in truth,
He looked at me to complete his sentence. They incarnate into a new form. He nodded and smiled in approval.
even the most advanced beings go through the same cycle because we're all created by the same consciousness, which manifests and experiences matter through us. It never really disappears, but changes form to experience something different, something more exciting.
His eyes sparkled with anticipation again. He was fascinated by it.
The Earth is also a reflection of the same consciousness. It has its own cycles, like all beings and other planets. She keeps changing forms until she graduates to become something else. I've told you before that this planet has held many civilizations which today's humans have no idea about. Most of them were much more advanced, both technologically and spiritually. These civilizations eventually disappeared due to the cycles the Earth went through thousands and thousands of years ago. However, you also need to understand that these cycles are directly affected by human behavior as well, because in the end, everything is connected.
His eyes studied me intently again to make sure he wasn't talking to a wall. He wasn't, but I did get distracted when our food arrived. We lapsed into silence while our waiter set the table. She was in her early 20s, with messy brown curls cascading down onto her shoulders. She placed the plate carefully and warned me that it was pretty hot as it had just come out of the oven. At the sight of the dish, My mouth watered. Azur had ordered lamb chops for me with sprigs of oregano threaded through the meat and mashed potatoes fuming with garlic lying on a tomato-based sauce. Distracted by the steam filling my nostrils and my growling stomach, I was startled when she asked us where we were from. She didn't wait for my answer but moved to Azur's side, holding a cheese grater, and asked him if he would like to have cheese on his garden salad. "We're from the US," I said. Her hazel eyes shined deeper even in the dimmed sunlight. "I hope you're having a pleasant time here in Istanbul." "I'm having the time of my life," I said. "It's the most beautiful city." And I meant it. Azur's eyes were on me. Whatever he saw or heard, he must have liked it. The admiration reflected in his fixed gaze was palpable. I cleared my throat uncomfortably. "You were saying, Earth has held many civilizations, and its cycles are affected by human behaviors because we're all connected?" I said as soon as our waiter left the table. I wanted to remind Azur where he had left off before the waiter brought our food and show him I was listening and interested. I also wanted to avoid his stares. My ploy worked as he took the hint. He diverted his focus to his plate and took a bite from his salad. I cut my meat carefully and took my first bite with just the right amount of meat and mashed potatoes on my fork. It was so good, I had to close my eyes to savor the taste for a second. "Oh my gosh, this is delicious!" Pleased by my interest in the subject and probably also by my thrill about the food on my plate, he nodded approvingly.
Thousands and thousands of years ago, many advanced civilizations collapsed and were submerged into the sea. Some were even more sophisticated than today's world, not only technologically, but also spiritually. Before their fall, most of the beings there lost their spirituality, and they developed cravings similar to those of today's society. They started to focus their existence on material things, relying on the technology they created. They did not realize how much they were hurting the Earth and themselves. The Earth cycle accelerated. New epidemics emerged. Earth reached a chaotic phase. This is what happens when humans are not happy with who they think they are, or when they lose their recognition of the Creator in themselves. The seasons, the weather changed drastically. Natural disasters began happening much more frequently. Does this sound familiar?
It was awfully familiar. I was disturbed by his words. I nodded but didn't comment.
These transitions usually go on for hundreds of years, intensifying, and eventually continents disappear into the water. The whole appearance of the world changes, and a new geographical state emerges. The Earth is reborn.
Nobody makes it through these transitions?
Depends on what you imply by saying makes it through. Do you mean ascension, survival, or simply transition?
I wrinkled my nose. Well, I meant being ascended, not being stuck in the third dimension of Earth energies. And I know from your perspective death doesn't mean much. It's only a transition from one life to another.
Some did ascend, but many didn't, as the Earth didn't move to higher dimensions as we expect it to this time around. And they didn't make enough progress with their soul development either. You need to understand that ascension can be independent of Earth's energies, but it's more likely to happen if your planet supports it as well. Also, staying behind is always a soul's decision at a higher level. Considering the fact that we're all billions of years old, a few thousand more years doesn't really matter.
What happens to those stay behind?
When the Earth begins a new cycle in the third dimension, the survivors usually begin life as more primitive civilizations. They may become cavemen.
Am I going to be a caveman if I don't make it? I asked, realizing what all this meant. It hit me for the first time. I don't want to be a caveman, I protested. My stomach churned again, and I lost my appetite. I stared blankly at the food on my plate since I didn't feel like eating anymore.
If your higher self decides it is necessary for your soul development...
But it's my higher self's decision, not mine, I insisted.
Your higher self is you. It is your ego that thinks you're separated, but you're not. And your job is to remember that you're not.
I was horrified by the revelation. I had simply thought I would keep going at the same pace for another 10,000 years if I didn't make it. But being a caveman was not part of my agenda. I stared out at the view. The city and the harbor bathed in the last traces of orange and purple sunlight reflected from the sky was a breathtaking maze of light and shadows. That helped. But you said Earth is also going to ascend to the fifth dimension with its inhabitants. There shouldn't be any caveman business anymore.
That is the more likely scenario, but we don't know exactly what will happen to the ones who stay behind. You may start in completely different realities of Earth in the third dimension, or on another planet. The possibilities are unlimited.
And worst of all, you'll lose track of me, I reminded him.
Correct.
Do you really believe I'll make it? He reached up and held my hand.
I'm a good teacher.
I know you're good, but I'm not sure if I'll be a good enough student. I knew there were certain things in my life I wasn't ready to let go of, not just yet. I decided not to worry about failing, as I did have a beautiful and most talented instructor. He released my hand and continued.
A few thousand years after one of those drastic changes, other species from other planets visited Earth, and one of them was the Pleiadians. They were not fifth-dimensional beings then. They, too, existed in the third dimension. Although these other species, including the Pleiadians, were extremely advanced technologically, they were also warlike beings. They fought with each other for natural resources. Earth was a beautiful planet, and it had so much to offer. They wanted to use locals as slaves to harvest natural resources.
The cavemen? I had to confirm.
The cavemen, but their current brain function was immature, and they started conducting experiments on the natives of the planet.
The Pleiadians did that?
Pleiadians and others did, but the Pleiadians became the most successful ones. They used their own genes and created a new human race out of the cavemen.
You said your race or other ETs are all good. Wouldn't interfere with humans' free will or their developments directly?
My race was operating in the third dimension then, and they were highly evolved in their technologies, but not so much with their spirituality. They didn't comprehend the consequence of interfering with another life form's evolution. And for that matter, they created karma and were bound to Earth's energy. Many had to reincarnate as human beings in their next lives. It was a lesson for everyone. The Galactic Federation no longer allows any entity with negative agendas to travel among stars or galaxies.
Is that why I'm here? Was I one of them? I asked, curious. How else could I end up in this hell if it weren't for my karma?
No. You and I were not Pleiadian then, but we were having other lives in other parts of the universe. Neither of us had anything to do with interference. You chose to be here just for the sake of the experience. There are many like you, in this time of the Earth's development. It is a great opportunity for those souls. Every one of them knows at a higher level what they've gotten themselves into. Did you know that the Earth's population has nearly tripled since the 1950s?
It was a rhetorical question. He knew I had no clue what the population would have been more than 60 years ago. I shook my head anyway, to confirm I didn't know.
The Earth's population was only 2.5 billion in the 50s, and it is around 7.3 billion today. Do you know why it's been increasing at such a rapid pace, despite hunger, natural disasters, and epidemics?
It was another rhetorical question, as I was sure he wasn't expecting me to answer, but I had to. Humans have been getting hornier towards the end? I giggled. Actually, the numbers really surprised me. I had no clue. He chuckled at my comment. Still wearing a smile on his face, he went on.
As scary as it may sound, it is a privilege to be here for any soul from anywhere in the universe. And if they all succeed in ascending, which won't be the case for many, it will be the experience of a lifetime. And I mean the lifetime of a soul, which is infinity, not human life. It is worth taking the risk. You can't imagine how many very young souls are here, taking the risk of failing, but they don't care. They want to experience the transition firsthand, and that is why the population increased so much.
The risk of turning into a caveman, I said to myself and sighed.
Again, not necessarily. Nobody knows the fate of those who will stay behind, but it is all worth the gamble. This doesn't happen often anywhere in the universe. Ascension of a planet is a big deal.
I understand. I nodded. My worry faded gradually. The food on my plate again looked delicious, and it was getting cold. I took another bite. A new race was created for Earth. And what happened next?
Not exactly. The creation was not complete in the eyes of the higher beings who were in charge of the well-being of the galaxy. A new human race was created in the third dimension by another race without the consent of both sides. The Galactic Federation had to be involved.
Who is the Galactic Federation again? I remembered. He mentioned about them before.
They're a highly evolved group of beings from different solar systems. A council, if you will. They're the gatekeepers of this galaxy. Each galaxy has its own.
The Galactic Federation is the gatekeeper of this galaxy?
Yes, it is. And the Federation is formed by evolved, conscious beings from different planets. Their priority has always been to prevent dark forces from controlling the galaxy. Pleiadians also became members eventually, but back then, they were part of the mess.
So dark forces exist in any dimension? I was confused. If I had to learn unconditional love to ascend to a higher dimension, how did those dark forces also exist in higher realms? Obviously, they didn't practice unconditional love. Is it the other end of the stick? Unconditional hatred?
It is hard to explain. You're not at a level right now to understand all aspects of creation. There are many things even I cannot understand, but think of it this way. When there is light, there is always darkness. Otherwise, the light wouldn't function, right? It's an aspect of duality, do you understand?
I nodded, doubting myself.
So the darkness is there to create balance. It is not a bad thing. It is merely a tool. Nighttime could be the best time for you to get a good night's sleep and rest. It may feel much better compared to the hectic energy of the daytime. But if you have a nightmare or fear of darkness, it might not be as pleasant. The same things apply in the higher dimensions. Darkness has unlimited energy, and it is used to recharge the light. However, it can be manipulated in the hands of the wrong beings.
But how did those beings ascend in the first place if they knew how to manipulate the dark? I asked.
All souls start their journey in the highest dimension, where we know we're part of all there is. We deliberately descend to lower levels to experience. We don't have to be bad to go lower. You've heard about the stories of fallen angels. They were not really fallen. They just chose a different path. It's harder to be manipulative and have an agenda at higher dimensions, so some chose to descend. Some didn't.
And you love them too, since your heart holds only unconditional love? I wondered.
I'm cautious with them since I need to maintain the balance.
He said with a heavy sigh.
But I also respect the fact that they're there to experience the possibilities of creation. They are there to learn and teach a great deal to others. They don't have any sense of balance anymore, so they forget that they're actually made of love. I do love them unconditionally. If my feelings turn to hatred, it would mean I'm becoming one of them.
I see, I said. But in fact, I was blinded by the fact that he could love his enemies. Let's go back to your story. The Galactic Federation took matters into their own hands when a new race was created on Earth, I reminded him.
Good. You've been listening. I should get you some dessert.
No, thank you. I'll take a rain check, I said. I couldn't help but associate my frequencies with my weight. After talking about how my frequencies were low, I didn't feel like eating dessert anymore. He cleared his throat and continued his story.
The Galactic Federation sent highly developed conscious beings to Earth from Sirius. The symbol of Sirius is known as a wolf or dog all over the world because of its star system. This symbol has always been used by many indigenous people in Africa, America, and even in old Turkish tales. They're eighth-dimensional beings, calibrated the DNA structure of the new human race so they would have a chance to evolve as well. Again, this had never been done before, anywhere, even in distant universes. But it was the only way to give the new race a chance. Lemuria and Atlantis were born.
The Atlantis story is a real one as well? I wasn't even surprised anymore. He nodded.
Atlanteans became good at many things. They lived long lives compared to today's humans. They were highly connected to the source, and only a few steps away from ascending to higher dimensions as a whole nation.
Source? You mean God?
Yes. God, Creator, Source, Allah, whatever you want to call it. Somehow they didn't make it. Some did, but not the whole race. Eventually, they started relying on more and more of the technology they created and became interested in more materialistic things. I guess no matter what, history keeps repeating itself. Earth's energy started to decline again.
I was overwhelmed with all these stories about civilizations falling again and again. I was also having difficulty understanding how Earth's energy was correlated to humans living on it. Which one would go down first? Is it Earth dragging down the humans, or is it the other way around?
Good question,
he said, but he also seemed to be puzzled by it as he paused for a few seconds.
They're all connected in the end. They cannot be separated, and that is why it is so important for humans to maintain a positive attitude so that the Earth cycle can be extended. They are both a reflection of each other. Regardless, it is all part of a bigger plan. It happened the way it was supposed to happen so that the souls can have new experiences.
How is that a new experience? I asked. From the way this story goes, Atlantis will end up being swallowed by the ocean, and humans don't have any control over it, at least not consciously. As you said before, history keeps repeating itself. It's kind of frustrating to hear that all civilizations end up the same way. It doesn't look like we learn anything. I took the last bite of my food. The sun was completely set, and the air was getting chilly. I was shivering, so I covered my shoulders with the blanket lying on the chair. Did they become cavemen again?
No, they didn't.
He smiled, giving me the good news.
It was about 13,000 years ago when Atlantis finally fell. However, this time the Galactic Federation didn't want to let go. They had invested so much in the human race, they didn't want them to lose their race consciousness altogether, the way they had earlier.
So they're interfering again? I'm glad they did, but this goes against free will, doesn't it?
The Galactic Federation always respects free will, and they won't intervene unless they make an agreement with these souls at a higher level. Again, this would be a completely new experience, and who would say no to it? The most advanced souls were spared from the fall with the help provided by the Galactic Federation. The ones who couldn't escape had to go through drastic changes. Their brain activities slowed down. They could have turned into cavemen again, but those advanced souls who had been spared by the Galactic Federation were sent out across to Earth to help those who had fallen. They taught humans the true knowledge, or as much as they could comprehend. They helped them to use their brains. They stayed on Earth for hundreds of years to make sure humans recovered from their fall. Of course, it was not possible to make them fully recover. They had a much shorter lifespan than they had previously, and they had no recollection of their past lives.
He filled his mouth with a bite of the salad he had ordered and started chewing.
You know, you also experienced that lifetime. You were an Atlantean and you went through the fall.
I realized I wasn't breathing. I felt lightheaded, so I took a deep breath. You said that happened 13,000 years ago, and you also told me I've been on the Earth for 10,000 years. How could I have been there?
Time is not linear, Lara, and it doesn't really exist. Nor does space. There really is no time or space, but it is something created as part of the illusion. It's like your dreams. You travel to places in your dreams, and it may feel like you spend years, but in reality, you're still in your bed for a matter of hours. It is the same case in the third dimension. It may feel like you spend centuries or have traveled many places around the world, or even around the universe, but in reality, you never left the side of the Creator. So when I talk about soul years, I mostly refer to cumulative experiences you receive in those lifetimes, and I convert it to a language you can understand.
I don't think I understand, but keep going. I'm not going to dwell on it. I gave in.
Let me know if you get cold. We can leave at any time.
I looked around. There were only a few occupied tables left. No, I'm not cold, I said. I wanted him to finish his story.
I know you have no interest in history or myths, but if you studied them, you would see how the characteristics of gods or the stories of different regions around the world were similar. The humans accepted the teachers as their gods. They had many powers that humans thought were extraordinary, not remembering that their ancestors, who technically were also themselves, had once had similar knowledge and power.
He stopped abruptly and looked at me intensely.
You're shivering and it is getting late here. We'd better get going.
He was right. As much as I didn't want him to stop, the blanket was of no use anymore. I accepted his offer reluctantly and nodded. He asked for the check. But you haven't come to the part that I'm most interested in. Why do we have different religions? I had to know the reasons behind the religions. Then maybe I could reason with my past and find some kind of forgiveness for my father in my heart. I'm working tomorrow. When are you going to tell me the rest of the story? I was sorry the day was over. I wasn't ready to let him go yet.
I didn't say we'd call it off for today. It is still early in Atlanta.
We took a taxi to return to the spacecraft. Climbing into the taxi made me even more nervous than traveling in his ship, but thankfully, the driver was pretty decent, and we arrived at our destination without any incident. We hovered over the city, and Azur showed me the city's lights at night. It was stunning. I had literally fallen in love with Istanbul and its people, which made the city even more beautiful. Thank you, I said. I appreciate what you've been doing for me. In fact, there were no words to explain my gratitude, but I tried. Stay tuned for Chapter 10 and more incredible artwork. Please remember to like our videos and subscribe to our channel.